Under the soft hum of neon lights and the clatter of coffee cups, the Pine Grove Diner was quiet that Sunday morning, just the way Walter Jennings liked it. For nearly a decade, the 79-year-old Navy medic had followed the same peaceful routine: church at 9:00, breakfast at 10:00, then back home to tend his garden. Table 6 by the window was his spot. It had the best sunlight for reading and just enough room to balance his crutches against the wall without blocking the aisle. Walter moved slowly with a practiced grace that came from decades of adjusting to life with one leg. He wore a plain jacket with a small Navy medic pin on the collar, and around his neck a faded plastic ID marked Disabled Veteran, U.S. Navy. He wasn't looking for attention. He just wanted coffee, eggs, and the peace that came with routine. But this morning wasn't routine. As Walter eased into his chair, the new manager, Kyle Benson, barely 30, sharply dressed, and clearly trying to impress someone, approached with a clipboard in hand and a look of impatience. "Sir Kyle," said, loud enough for several tables to hear, "I'm going to have to ask you to move. This table's reserved for customers who order full meals, not just coffee." Walter blinked. "I've already ordered. Been coming here for years." Kyle crossed his arms. "Well, we're under new management now, and we can't make exceptions. We need the space for paying customers." Around the diner, forks paused midair. Eyes glanced up from menus, but no one said a word. Walter reached for his crutches, his face a mixture of confusion and quiet shame. As he tried to rise, the lanyard holding his ID slipped off his neck and hit the floor with a dull slap. The words "Vietnam Veteran" stared back from the cracked plastic. Still, no one moved, until they did. At table 9 near the back, 3 men stood up in unison. Navy uniforms, crisp movements precise. One was a lieutenant commander. The others wore SEAL insignias on their sleeves. They hadn't said a word until now, but their eyes had never left the scene. The lieutenant stepped forward, his voice steady, calm, and undeniable. "Sir," he said to Walter, "you don't have to leave. You've already earned this table." The diner went still, and in that moment, everything began to change. Kyle Benson's expression flickered confusion, then irritation. "Excuse me, gentlemen," he said, stepping toward the men in uniform. "This matter doesn't concern you." The lieutenant commander didn't flinch. "It does now." Walter, still frozen halfway between sitting and standing, looked up, trying to process what was happening. The younger sailor to the lieutenant's right stepped forward. Petty Officer Riley Zhang, just shy of 30, bent down and picked up Walter's ID from the floor like it was a folded flag. Sir Zhang said with quiet reverence, handing the badge back to Walter, "Thank you for your service." The tension in the diner was palpable. Customers lowered their phones. One child stopped tapping on his iPad and stared. A woman at the counter mouthed something under her breath and wiped her eyes. Kyle tried again, his voice harder now. "Look, I don't care if he's—" "You should," said the man to the lieutenant's left. Chief Petty Officer Dean Alvarez, broad-shouldered and calm, but with eyes like flint. "You just disrespected a disabled Navy veteran in front of 3 active-duty sailors." Kyle's face turned a shade darker. "We have rules." "I was told," Lieutenant Commander Marcus Rowe held up a hand, silencing him. "You were told to treat your customers with dignity. You failed. This man wore the uniform long before we did. He deserves better than this." Without waiting for permission, the 3 sailors pulled chairs from nearby tables and joined Walter. Not as saviors, not as a spectacle, as brothers. Walter's voice was shaky. "You boys don't need to get involved." "We're not boys, sir," Rowe replied gently. "We're sailors, just like you." Alvarez nodded. "Besides, you already fought your fight. Now it's our turn." Across the room, other diners began to stir. A middle-aged couple at booth 2 placed their forks down and stood. A gray-haired trucker in a camo vest raised his coffee cup in silent salute. The air shifted from indifference to solidarity. Kyle's lips parted like he wanted to protest, but the words wouldn't come. He looked around for support and found none. Riley turned to the manager. He ordered coffee and eggs. "That's not a request. That's a routine, a right. A reminder that places like this exist because men like him made sure they could." The waitress, older, kind-eyed, clearly torn, hurried over with a plate. "Mr. Jennings, your usual." She placed it gently on the table along with a steaming cup of black coffee. "It's on the house today." Walter tried to speak but stopped, his throat tight. He looked down at his food, then at the men beside him. Marcus Rowe placed his hand lightly on the table. "May we eat with you, sir? It would be our honor." Walter gave a slow, grateful nod. The four of them ate in quiet conversation, swapping service years, stories, places. They'd been people they remembered. Alvarez shared a brief story about a medic he'd once trained with in Iraq. Riley asked about Walter's unit. Rowe listened more than he spoke, but when he did, his words carried the kind of weight that only men who've seen both war and its cost truly understand. Meanwhile, Kyle slunk behind the counter, head low. No apology, just absence. The story didn't need his voice anymore. A few minutes later, a young server approached the table and whispered to Rowe, "Sir, there's someone on the phone asking for you. Said they're from base command." Rowe stood, took the call near the register, spoke quietly for a moment, then returned. They saw the video, he said to the others. Someone recorded the exchange. It's already circulating on the base's social feed. Walter chuckled. "Guess I'm famous now." "No, sir," Riley said with a smile. "You're finally seen." The rest of the brunch crowd had shifted in tone entirely. Some people approached the table to thank Walter. A mother asked if her son just enlisted could shake his hand. Others simply nodded respectfully as they passed. When the meal ended, the sailors rose first. Rowe offered his hand again. "If you ever want company on Sundays, sir, we're just a call away." Walter stood adjusting his crutches. "You didn't have to do this." Alvarez grinned. "Yeah, we did," Zhang added. "A Navy medic saved my uncle's life in Fallujah. I've never met him, but I think I just did." As they left the diner, buzzed not in gossip, but in admiration. Walter, once quietly ushered toward the door, now exited with a silent escort of respect. At the counter, the waitress handed Walter a to-go cup with a smile. "See you next Sunday." Walter hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, next Sunday." Outside, the sun had finally broken through the morning clouds, painting soft gold across the sidewalk. Walter's shadow merged with the sailors as they walked toward the parking lot. Four men, different generations, same uniform. And behind them, a diner full of strangers remembered something they'd forgotten. That respect isn't reserved for uniforms or ceremonies. It's proven when people stand up without being asked for those who once stood for them. The silence that followed Lieutenant Commander Rowe's words felt like a reset button for the entire diner. Walter Jennings, still gripping his crutches, looked up in quiet disbelief. Around him, the same patrons who had looked away moments ago now sat frozen, unsure whether to applaud or AP. Manager Kyle Benson's jaw tightened. "This is a private business," he said, his voice faltering slightly under the scrutiny of the three Navy men. "We have policies." Rowe stepped forward. "And you just violated something." Chief Petty Officer Dean Alvarez stooped down and retrieved Walter's fallen veteran ID. He wiped it gently with a napkin and handed it back with both hands, a gesture that made Walter's lip quee. "Thank you." "Walt," Petty Officer Riley Zhang nodded. "Walter Hesita." The three sailors moved their plates from table 9 to table 6. They didn't raise their voices. They didn't give speeches. But their simple act of sitting beside Walter the rest of the diners finally moved, some offering quiet nods of respect, others murmuring apologies they hadn't been brave enough to say earlier. A teenage boy approached with his father and whispered. By the time Mrs. Harper, the owner of Pine Grove Diner, arrived 20 minutes later, she'd already received 3 phone calls, one from her longtime server, another from a customer, and the third from the town's Veterans Association. The moment she stepped inside and saw the 3 sailors with Walter and the stiff look on Kyle's face, she understood immediately. "Kyle," she said, her voice calm but icy. "My office. Now." He started to argue, but the look on her face left no room for discussion. Inside the office, Mrs. Harper listened in the stony silence as Kyle fumbled through excuses about revenue and policy. When he was done, she folded her arms. "You don't belong in my diner," she said. "Pack up your things." Kyle was out the back door by noon. That afternoon, Mrs. Harper walked over to Walter's table, now surrounded by the 3 sailors and a growing group of onlookers. "Mr. Jennings," she said softly, "I owe you an apology. This place, it was built to be a second home for people like you." Walter shook his head. "You don't owe me anything. Just make sure no one else has to go through it." She nodded, eyes glistening. "That's exactly what I intend to do." By the next Sunday table, 6 had changed. It now bore a small brass plaque, hand-engraved by a local metal shop reserved for those who served, in honor of our veterans. A folded American flag sat beside a fresh cup of coffee. No one sat there unless invited. News spread quickly. Photos of the incident, along with a short write-up, had made their way to local newspapers and online veteran forums. But what captured people's hearts wasn't just the confrontation, it was the quiet dignity of how the community responded. The following weeks saw a growing tradition take root. Veterans from all across the county began arriving on Sunday mornings. Some wore uniforms. Others came in street clothes only identified by worn ball caps or quiet pride. The three sailors, Ro, Alvarez, and Zhang, returned regularly, forming a bridge between generations. The Pine Grove Diner transformed. What had once been a sleepy local eatery was now something of a living tribute. A section near the back was renamed the Veterans Corner, with framed photos of service members donated by patrons. A retired Marine added a shadow box with his medals. An Air Force pilot brought in a signed flight log. Walter donated one of his Navy Corpsman patches. High school students, church groups, and military families came to observe what they now called Honor Hour. Some came to learn, some came to thank, and some, like Walter, came simply to belong. But perhaps the most surprising moment came 6 weeks later. One quiet Sunday, just as the rush was thinning out, Kyle Benson walked back through the front doors of the diner. He wasn't wearing a suit this time, just jeans, a plain shirt, and an expression that held no trace of arrogance. Mrs. Harper spotted him first and stepped toward the counter. Before she could speak, Kyle raised his hand gently. "I'm not here to argue," he said. "I just wanted to apologize." The room hushed. Conversation slowed. Even Walter turned from his table surprised. Kyle stepped toward Walter and bowed his head. "I didn't understand what I was doing that day," he said. "I thought I was following policy. I didn't realize I was breaking something much more important." Walter stared at him for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Understanding comes late sometimes, but it's still welcome." Kyle cleared his throat. "If there's anything I can do, volunteer serve coffee, clean floors. I just want to make it right." Mrs. Harper spoke gently. "You can start with Sunday mornings, veterans' breakfasts." And so redemption began, quietly, earnestly. Kyle showed up every Sunday in an apron, no longer a manager, but a servant of the people he had once ignored. Over time, he learned the names, the stories, and the silent codes of honor that stitched those tables together. Walter never missed a week, and while he didn't speak often, he always noticed the coffee Kyle poured. And one morning as Kyle refilled his cup, Walter looked up with a faint smile. "Not bad," he said. "You're learning." Over the following months, the honor table became more than a symbol. It became a magnet. Each Sunday, the Pine Grove Diner filled with conversations, layered in decades of memory, the cautious tones of younger sailors, the worn laughter of old Marines, the quiet nods shared between veterans who didn't need words to understand each other. And at the center of it all was Walter Jennings, never seeking attention, but somehow drawing people in with the calm gravity of someone who had survived war and built peace in its aftermath. He always arrived early. The same battered Honda, the same steady steps with his crutches. He'd sit at a different table now, never the honor table, but always close enough to watch it. His place became unofficially known as Walter's Corner, where anyone was welcome to join if they brought an open mind and a willingness to listen. And listen they did. Veterans from Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan all found themselves gathering around him. They shared stories, not of glory, but of comradeship, of the ones who didn't come home of mistakes made and lessons carried. Walter never preached. He asked questions. He laughed when others laughed. And sometimes he just sat in silence, letting others fill the air with memories that had long gone unspoken. Kyle Benson, the former manager, turned weekly volunteer, showed up every Sunday without fail. He wore a plain apron, his once sharp hair now tamed into something humbler. He never asked for acknowledgement. Instead, he served plates, refilled coffees, and took careful note of every preference, treating each veteran like a returning family member. And most importantly, he always asked Walter directly what he needed before assuming anything. Walter watched Kyle with quiet eyes. There was no dramatic forgiveness, no formal apology. It wasn't needed. Forgiveness, Walter believed, was something you earned through consistent action. And Kyle was proving that every single week. When local high school teacher Miss Ramirez heard about the weekly gatherings, she arranged to bring her students once a month. They sat respectfully around the honor table, notebooks in hand, but often forgetting to write, too engrossed in the living history unfolding around them. One Sunday, a student asked Walter, "What do you think courage means?" He thought for a long moment, eyes scanning the faces around him. Courage, he said finally, isn't about being fearless. It's about standing firm when your knees want to buckle. It's about seeing someone treated wrongly and deciding quietly that you're not going to let it slide, even if you're scared. Another student asked why he never sat at the honor table himself. Walter smiled. "Because it's not for me anymore. It's for everyone who never made it home. I come to honor them, not to replace them." A few weeks later, the honor table received another addition, a framed black and white photo of 4 young sailors from Walter's unit in Vietnam. All of them had died in action. The caption below read, "The ones who held the line so others could come home." Walter never said who placed it there, but those closest to him suspected it was his quiet tribute. As word of the Sunday gatherings spread, nearby towns sent their own veterans to visit. The diner's staff added more tables and expanded Sunday hours. Local businesses offered free coffee for vets. The county's Veterans Affairs Office even used the Pine Grove Diner as a recruitment hub for counseling and health services. And through it all, y'all kept serving. One winter morning, with snow lining the sidewalks and breath visible in the air, Walter arrived later than usual. Kyle met him at the door gently, took his crutches, and walked him to his usual seat. Without prompting, he placed down black coffee extra hot in 2 napkins. One for Walter's lap, one for his shaking hands. "You're getting better at this," Walter said with a grin. "I have a good teacher," Kyle replied. That same morning, Walter noticed a young woman sitting alone at the honor table. She wore a simple army sweatshirt and stared down at her coffee with haunted eyes. Walter made his way over slowly and sat across from her. "First time here?" he asked. She nodded. "My dad used to sit at tables like this, every week. Never talked much, just listened." Walter nodded. "Sounds like a good man." She looked up, eyes watering. "He died last year. I didn't know where else to go." Walter placed a hand over hers. "You're in the right place now." Wordlessly, Kyle brought over a second cup of coffee and sat it in front of her. No one asked who she was. No one needed to. She belonged. That moment, small, unannounced, and unseen by most, was what made the Pine Grove Diner different. It wasn't about grand gestures. It was about consistency. About seeing someone's pain and choosing to sit beside it. About remembering that service never truly ends, and neither does the need for connection. Later that day, as the last patrons trickled out and the chairs were stacked for closing, Kyle turned to Walter. "Do you think they'll keep coming?" Walter glanced at the honor table where the girl had left a small photo of her father tucked behind the salt shaker. "They will," he said. "As long as someone remembers why we stand up, they'll keep coming." The diner lights dimmed, but the warmth remained. Outside, the snow continued to fall gently. Inside, service was still being honored, not with flags or speeches, but with coffee conversation and the unwavering choice to treat others with respect. 3 years later, the Pine Grove Diner was quieter on Sundays. Not emptier, never that, but quieter. Walter Jennings had passed away peacefully in his sleep, his crutches leaning neatly against the wall by his bed, as if he meant to use them one more time. His funeral drew veterans from across the country, some who had never met him, but felt they knew him through the stories shared at the honor table. That table, now draped in a folded American flag and adorned with a small bronze plaque, remained permanently reserved. Visitors came from different states just to sit nearby, leaving handwritten notes, old dog tags, and challenge coins beneath its glass surface. One corner held a laminated copy of Walter's final letter, addressed to future sailors, written in careful penmanship just months before his passing. In that letter, Walter wrote, "There will be days when no one sees what you do. Do the right thing anyway. Leadership isn't about being the loudest in the room. It's about being the first to stand up when someone else can't. That's how you lead. That's how you serve. And that's how you earn the title you wear on your chest." At the next graduation ceremony at the U.S. Naval Academy, his letter was read aloud by the valedictorian, followed by a full moment of silence. Not for grief, but for respect, for the kind of quiet courage Walter embodied every day. Back in Pine Grove, Kyle Benson, now a Veterans Outreach Coordinator, still volunteered every Sunday wearing the same apron he once wore in shame. High schoolers still came to listen. New faces appeared, drawn not by advertisement, but by word of mouth. They sat at Walter's old corner, learned from the elders who remained, and added their stories to a growing oral history of service and humanity. And in the hush between conversations, Walter's legacy lived on not in fanfare, but in practice. The lesson, true leadership doesn't need a microphone. It needs presence. It needs consistency. And above all, it needs humility. Walter Jennings didn't change the world with a speech. He changed it by refusing to walk away when it would have been easier to stay silent. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who still believes in dignity, in service, in choosing what's right, even when it's hard. Drop a comment below. Tell us about a veteran who changed your life. And if stories like these matter to you, subscribe to our channel so we can keep honoring those who stand when others sit down. Because some heroes don't wear capes, they wear silence, and still teach the world how to listen.